Julia Jones, Family and Consumer Science Extension Agent for Currituck County, and I'm going to give you a little canning intro today. First, let's discuss why we can. The main reason we can is to destroy microorganisms and inactivate enzymes that cause spoilage. And for this purpose, food is heated to a specific temperature. During this heating process, air is forced out, and as the jar cools, a vacuum seal is formed. There are two types of canning. There's pressure canning, which is done with a weighted pressure canner or a gauge pressure canner, and then there is a water bath canner. So water baths can your high acid foods, which are going to be your fruits, your jellies, and then your low acid foods are canned in your pressure canner. They get up to a little bit higher temperature. Here you can vegetables, meats, poultry, soups, and if you mix a low or high acid food. Low acid foods can grow botulism. Pressure canners like these usually get up to 240 degrees at sea level. But boiling water canners can only get up to temperatures. There's a temperature of boiling water, which is 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. At 212 degrees, you can destroy yeast, mold, and most bacteria, but you cannot destroy C. botulinum spores, which can survive at much higher temperatures. They continue to grow in oxygen-free environments in low-acid foods with temperatures between 40 and 140 or 120 degrees. They also thrive in relatively high moisture environments. C. botulinum can be found in canned foods, also smoked fish, sausage, full wrapped baked potatoes, packaged mushrooms, and pot pies. So to prevent contaminating your foods, it's important that you follow the proper processing guidelines. Many of these guidelines can be found in your So Easy to Preserve book, along with the Ball Blue book, and you can find these at your cooperative extension office. So first we're going to talk about boiling water canning. Boiling water canners, they look like a big pot. However, they have this jar rack in the bottom. The jar rack is used so you can put your cans on it. It's specifically made for the bigger cans, so it's a little bit harder to adjust your smaller cans in there. But the main reason you have this in there is so that you do not put your jars directly on the bottom of the pot. Putting them directly on the bottom of the pot will allow the food in the bottom to get warm. You can even break your jars, and you don't want to cook the food in the bottom. So there are two ways to pack the foods into the jars. There's a raw pack, which means we're not going to do anything to them before we put them in the jars. Usually you'll pack them in a colder temperature. Then there's hot pack. Things that are hot packed are going to be pickles. This is pear butter, hot packed, and jams and jellies are also hot packed. We process these before we put them in the jars. The first thing you're going to want to do is use your funnel. These are made specifically for canning, so they fit perfectly on the lid. You'll scoop whatever you're canning into the jar. After you do that, you'll use this is called a bubble wand, also measures head space, which we'll talk about a little bit about later. You use your bubble wand and get out all the bubbles, because this will affect your head space later on. Then if you're processing anything that will be processed for less than 15 minutes, you'll need to heat up the jars and sanitize them. I always process my jars no matter how long I'm doing anything, because a lot of times we reuse them, so we want to make sure that they're sanitary. You will wipe the rim of the jar. You'll make sure that you use a lid that you haven't used before, because this seal has to be brand new. You won't touch that seal. You'll put it on. Then you'll put your lids on, your rim on, fingertip tight, because you're going to want to let the air get out. As we said earlier, the way that we form a vacuum seal is to expel the air. Then you'll use this nifty thing, a jar lifter, and place it in the rack appropriately. Now that we've placed our jar appropriately in the boiling water canner, we want to make sure that our temperature before we place our jar in there is at around 180 degrees, but simmering. So you don't really have to measure that temperature, but you want to make sure it's simmering. Then we'll place the lid on, and we'll turn up the temperature so that it gets to boiling, and we'll start counting our processing time from the boiling point. So as you're processing, you always want to make sure that the water stays about an inch above the lid of the jar. For shorter processing times, you won't need to add extra water. When you add extra water though, you need to remember that you have boiling water in here and you have a glass jar, so you want to add boiling water to it so that you don't break your jars. If your processing time is finished, you can use your jar lifter to lift out your jar and try not to tip it. You want to pull it straight out and place it on a padded surface to cool. Do not retighten your lids or adjust your lids in any way until they have cooled for 24 hours. After 24 hours, you can remove the ring, like this one, and they can be stored like this. Because you can reuse the ring and not the lid, a lot of people will just buy these lids to save on costs. After 24 hours, you should check to make sure that they're sealed. If you push on it and it pops, it has not sealed. Make sure that it's in a place where there will not have a draft, because this is an extreme temperature change, and remember, this is glass that we're using. As I mentioned before, there are two types of canning. So now that we've looked at water bath canning, let's look at pressure canning. Now before me, I have two types of canners. This is a pressure gauge. This is a pressure gauge canner. This is a weighted pressure canner. So they're slightly different. These are a little more popular nowadays because they do not lose their calibrations over time. Pressure gauges need to be tested each year to make sure that they're not off. If you're not processing your low acid foods properly, you could grow some botulinum in there. So all you need to bring is your lid to your local cooperative extension agent, and they can make sure that the pressure on your gauge is the proper pressure. And you'll also want to inspect this little gasket here. You will need to oil it, usually with vegetable oil or some kind of cooking oil, each year, because they'll get dry and brittle. If you don't have a proper seal, you're not going to get the proper pressure. So you want to make sure that this gauge or this gasket is going to seal well. So now we're going to look at the weighted pressure canner. The weights do not need to be adjusted each year, they'll stay the same, so you don't have to bring these in, although it's good to check your gaskets, make sure that they have been oiled properly and do not have any breaks in them, so that you get your proper seal. Pressure canners, like boiling water canners, have the rack in the bottom with the same concept as you don't want to put the jars directly on the bottom of the canner. Pressure canners also cannot be put on a ceramic cooktop, because they are not rated for that. Pressure canners get a lot of pressure and they could break your ceramic top. This is just an important key to remember. Once we've placed our canner rack in the bottom, we will fill up our pressure canner to the fill line. Per your manufacturer's instructions, in this canner, that's about 2 inches. And we're not submerging the whole can in water, we're just building up pressure, so you really don't need a whole lot. And remember, once you put your lid on, you cannot open it up again, so you want to make sure that you definitely fill it all the way up to the line. So as in boiling water canning, pressure canners can be packed in raw pack or hot pack. The green beans that we canned in one of my canning classes, we packed raw. And raw pack doesn't mean that we didn't process them a little bit before. We do want to blanch them, so we stop the enzymes so that they stay this pretty green color. And as we said before, enzymes will also create spoilage. So once we've packed our jars appropriately, we've got out the bubbles, we will set these in here the same way with our jar lifter. And the water will rise above your fill line at this point, but that's okay. Once you put all of your jars in the pressure canner, you want to make sure that everybody's sitting straight up and down. This does not have the partitions like the other one does, so you can put them wherever you'd like. Then you'll have to seal your pressure canner lid. Pressure canner lids have a open and close with a little arrow, and so you want to line these arrows up. And you'll pull it tight to seal it. And once you have this going, This is a lock. On most of them, they have some sort of locking mechanism. It may be in the handle. It will pop up when any pressure is built up. Now, as you'll notice, I don't have my weight on my pressure canner yet. What I'm waiting for is a V-like funnel to come out. Once I get a clear V, I know that I have built up enough pressure to put my weight on. Each one of these is a different weight. You'll have to look at your processing instructions to know how much weight to put on. Once you put on the appropriate weight, you're wanting to see it move back and forth, kind of like a metronome, with that kind of tone. You may not hear it, but it will move back and forth, and it needs to move back and forth slightly even. Once you get the appropriate rhythm, you can start your processing time. With pressure canners, it's a little bit different. Once you hit your processing time, you will turn your heat off and let it cool naturally. Do not remove the weight or try to open the lid. The canner needs to depressurize itself. So as it cools, it will release a little bit of pressure. Once your lock has disengaged, you can open your pressure canner. This usually takes at least overnight, maybe 24 hours, so just leave it. You can open your lid. Using your jar lifter, you'll pull your lid out. And once again, you'll set it on a cushioned surface to cool. Now they should probably, if you've left it overnight, already be mostly cool. You'll want to give them at least another 12 hours before you check to see if they're sealed or you mess with them. And so that is it for pressure canning. So now that we've talked about boiling water canning, we've talked about pressure canning, I want to go over a couple of little details with you. The first thing you'll notice whenever you look at a processing recipe is that it will tell you a specific headspace. So headspace is going to be the measurement between whatever you're putting in your jar and the rim of the jar. If you get any home canning kits, they come with a headspace measurer, also doubling as a bubble wand. So I am going to measure out a 1/2 inch headspace for this particular jar. So I will put the second step on the rim of my jar, and as you can see, I'm nowhere near that. So using my funnel, I will fill up a little more. Once you have the appropriate amount of headspace, you'll take a clean rag, wipe the lid, then using your jar magnet, start with your lid, not touching the seal, then your ring, and tighten it only fingertip tight. Now it's important that you use a 2-piece lid. The 1-piece lids are not guaranteed to seal with safety. You can use a jar such as this one, which is a pint. You could use something such as a 1/2 pint. And you'll have to also notice how the 1/2 pint, and this is a quart jar, has two separate mouths, a regular mouth and a wide mouth. And to make sure that you use the appropriate lid for the appropriate jar. Then you also have your funnel, which helps you fill your jar. You'll have your jar lifter. Some other equipment that you might need would be something to skim the top of your jam or jelly, a ladle to fill your jars. So blanching is a process where we stop the enzymes in food so that it will prevent spoilage. So when we get them to the appropriate blanching temperature and time, we can pull them out with one of these guys. Some other things you might need would be canning or pickling salt, which you can find right with the regular salt in the grocery store. Pectin, they have liquid or powder pectin and several different brands. You might also need some cheesecloth, which is used when you're making juice for jellies. For more information on canning You can check out the USDA's complete guide to home canning on the USDA website. You can also check out the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension's Center for Home Food Preservation, and all of these are available for download online for free. You can also check your local cooperative extension agency, and I have enjoyed teaching you about canning. Thank you.